Today we're going to do another book review. The book we're interested in is Inside the Machine by John Stokes. So let's crack on and we will review this book. So let's have a look at Inside the Machine by John Stokes. Now this was published in 2006, so it's not bang up to date, but there is enough detail in it to give us a good indication of how a modern CPU is structured. So I'll give you a look at the book here first of all. So here we go, and I'll show you the back. Now the writing's quite small, so you might not be able to read that. I'll leave it there for a few seconds. Now, to give you a flavour for the book, it's in colour. There's lots of fantastic images which I haven't seen anywhere before, so they're all bespoke to the book, and these have all been made up especially for the book. So that gives you a little indication of what the book looks like in the structure. So let's quickly go on and we'll have a look and we'll see what's actually inside the contents. So here's the brief contents here: basic computing concepts, mechanics of program execution, pipelined execution, superscaler execution, and I'll let you read those through yourself. There's no point in me just sitting here and reading this stuff out to you. Now the actual full contents you can see here. So again, basic computing concepts, the mechanics of a program execution, pipelined execution, superscaler execution, the Intel Pentium and Pentium Pro, the PowerPC processors, the Intel Pentium 4 versus the Motorola. This is a nice little thing that he does through the book. He picks out a couple of different architectures and he compares them. The Intel Pentium 4 versus the Motorola 4GE or G4E, 64-bit and x86 64-bit machines. The G5 IBM PowerPCs, understanding caching and performance, and we have the Intel Pentium M Core Duo and Core 2 Duo in the bibliography, and a nice section on suggested reading. So I'll just read over the first little bit here. Preface. When a mathematician and computer pioneer, Richard Hamming, penned the maxim in 1962, the era of digital computing was still very much in its infancy. There were only about 10,000 computers in existence worldwide. Each one was large and expensive, and each required, and so it continues. So it's a nice, beautifully written, beautifully put together, and it's a nice kind of wordy description, but there's lots of fantastic images as well. So we start off here with the basic computing concepts, and you can see here it starts right from the very basics of some kind of machine with instructions and data and a result, and we've got a 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. So it goes right to the very beginning. It looks at a model of the computer as a file clerk, and it goes through each of the components: the arithmetic logic unit, the bus, and it refines this model here, and you can see that it's added in some storage area here, and then it goes through and it looks at the registers as well, so it adds in the register. So it gradually builds up the idea of an architecture of a simple CPU, and it goes through looking at instructions, so some of the basic general instructions that you'll have in a CPU, and you can see it's the first lot of instructions mentioned here: the add and the store and the load. And then it moves on and has a little look about addressing modes and some different types of addressing modes. And that's the first chapter. So it's a nice introduction to the basic ideas of what a CPU is and how it works. Now it then comes on and it looks at how a program actually gets executed, and it's looking at the opcode and the machine language. So it splits it into different methods of generating the actual instructions. And you can see here it goes through actual different types of instructions. So for example, the store instruction, there'll be a load instruction, and there'll be some branching instruction. And it mentions here about instruction set architecture, and you can see here it's got again a basic drawing of the CPU and the basic parts of the structure of a CPU. And it mentions the fetch execute cycle. It's talking about the clock. Again, there's the branch instructions there, and the different other forms of different instructions that you'll get within a typical CPU. So it's a nice little introduction to instruction set architectures. Now this is where it really starts to get interesting, and this is the section which really kind of sold the book to me when I first had a look at it. So pipelined architectures. So it goes through some nice graphical images of initially a basic flow. So it splits the CPU into the front end and the back end, and then it goes through pipelined architecture and it explains it in a couple of different ways, so different analogies. And then it goes through and it looks at the pipelined architectures in terms of how they speed up the execution of your CPU. So you can see the images are really beautifully put together, and it's very readable. This is the thing, you can just pick it up at any section really and just start reading it. Although whenever I read it, I actually worked through cover to cover, which at the time there's so much information in it that there was stuff going in one ear and it was falling out the other. There was so much detail within the book. And then it goes on to looking at superscaler execution. So basically we're looking at taking the single units and we just make multiple units out of them. So for example, we'll take 2, 3 or 4 ALUs, and we see how that superscaler increases or makes the execution of the CPU so much greater. And also looking at arithmetic logic units and the different parts of the arithmetic logic unit. So we're now looking at floating point units, and we're looking at vector and non-vectors and integer, and within the integer unit. And this section here on instruction set architecture, and a nice history here of instruction set architectures, very readable, very well put together. And there's an awful lot of detail here, structural hazards within pipelined architectures, register file, control hazards. So a nice introduction to the idea of a pipeline of superscalar architectures. Now this is where we start to look at, well, what would whenever the book was released in 2006, what would have been a modern CPU. So it compares different architectures, and this is the nice thing I do like about the book. It puts one architecture against another, and this really does help to show up how some ideas are much better designed, and how some architectures have got advantages and disadvantages. So it's got the Intel Pentium and the Pentium Pro. So again, it's this basic kind of little drawing that picks up the core ideas of the overall architecture of, in this case, the Pentium processors. and it's talking here about L2 cache and cache memory, and the Pentium's pipelining, and the branch instructions, and it looks at the back end and the integer ALUs, floating point ALUs, and different instructions for example, there's fadd, so floating point add, and there's a x86 overhead on the Pentium, and there's a historical summary. That's another thing as well, a little historical summary on each of the CPUs. And there's the Intel P6 microarchitecture, and some nice beautiful overall drawings of the basic structure of the architecture. So there's lots and lots and lots of detail within this book. I don't want to get through every single page and every single section of it, other than to say that the diagrams are beautifully presented, and they really add a lot to the book and a lot to the understanding of the basic structures of modern CPUs. And then it goes on looking at power PCs, processors, the 600, 700 and 7400 series. And again, it goes through the same process of looking at the actual overall architecture, and it covers the same sort of areas that we've seen in the previous CPU. And there's the detail in it is sometimes it could be quite overwhelming, but what you want to do is, rather than do as I did, I read the book cover to cover, you can always pick out just the CPU that you're interested in, and first of all, and just go in and have a look at that. I think that's probably quite a good idea. And again, it's got the historical summary of the architecture. And there we go, the next one, Intel Pentium 4 versus the Motorola G4. Okay, design philosophies. Now, I'm not going to talk through all of this. I'll just quickly flick through just to give you an indication. Now you can see this one here. You look, it's got what's this? It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floating point units. You've got the integer unit here. There's so much involved. There's fantastic drawings here that give an awful lot of detail. So again, I don't want to talk you through individual sections in any major detail. I want to give you a good broad overview of the book. So there's Intel's Pentium 4 versus Motorola G4E, the back end. Okay. And then we're on to 64-bit computing. The G5 IBM Power PC. Understanding caching and performance. And the Intel Pentium M-Core Duo. And there's some nice little sections here on the actual floor plans of some of these chips. So another thing to note here at the end is that it has a nice little section on suggested reading. So you can see here the bibliography and suggested reading, and there's an awful lot of details here on other books that you can go and pick up if you're interested in learning about any particular family or architecture of CPUs. And another thing is nice as well at the end is that they do have a nice index, which is always a good thing, and there's plenty of details within the index. So that's the book for today. If you want to get a lead in to how a modern CPU is structured, then I would suggest that this is an excellent place to start. So that's all for this video. Thank you for listening. I'll get you on the next book review. Goodbye.